thank you, Dr. Cavoukian, for accepting our invitation to the first edition of the Global Data Conference. You've always been at the forefront of the privacy arena, both as a commissioner of Ontario and in the academia field, and now as the executive director of Global Privacy and Security by Design Center in Toronto. I would just like to ask you a couple of questions leveraging on your career. You've been the author of Privacy by Design concept in 2009, and it was immediately taken by the regulators worldwide gathered in Jerusalem in 2010. We were together over there.
Yes.
And then subsequently incorporated in the GDPR in 2016. Today, ISO announced a new standard, the ISO 31700 on privacy by design. So how do you see privacy by design today after 14 years?
I am so delighted that it has spread like fire. It's amazing. When the GDPR included privacy design in the General Data Protection Regulation and privacy as the default, which is one of the 7 foundational principles of privacy by design, then it took off globally. Everyone wanted to do something with privacy by design. And when new laws come into place now, like last year, Brazil introduced a new privacy law, they include privacy by design in it. And the reason I'm so excited about it, the reason I created it back when I was privacy commissioner, is because we have to be proactive to try to prevent the privacy harms from arising. Privacy laws are wonderful, of course, but they kick in usually afterwards once the data breach or privacy harm has taken place. They kick in to offer a remedy. Very important. But I want to minimize the number of privacy harms proactively by embedding privacy into our operations, bake it into the code, into all of your infrastructure, so that you can ideally have fewer privacy problems to deal with. And that's why I think it's taken off so well globally. And I'm hoping that that will continue.
Very good. And secondly, starting from your experience as a regulator, how do you see the role and powers of the supervisory authorities nowadays?
I want to urge all regulators, supervisors, etc., to please speak up. My fear is, this has happened in Canada, and I don't know if it's happening elsewhere, is that privacy commissioners are being quiet. They're not going to the media. They're not jumping in whenever there's a privacy problem or a data breach and saying, this is completely unacceptable. That's what I think we have to do as regulators. We have to speak up. We have to object to privacy problems that are arising, data breaches. We have to tell companies and governments what they're doing wrong, because usually that's the problem. It's rarely is it intentional that they want to breach privacy, but they have to be educated on how they can prevent the harms from arising. So when I was commissioner, I was very active, both in the public and the private sector, talking to governments, talking to companies, how privacy can be a positive feature, not a negative. I remember I talked to many companies, and I would go into the boardroom with board of directors, the CEO is there, and their heads are down and they think I'm going to tell them to stop doing a lot of what they're doing. And I said, please give me 10 minutes. Let me show you how privacy can give you a competitive advantage, can build trust with your customers and your citizens. And if you don't like what I'm saying after 10 minutes, then I'll leave. And they say, okay. So then I would start and I would present privacy as a positive, not a negative. This will enhance your operations. It will build trust. It will attract new customers and maintain the customers you have. Citizens will embrace this instead of being distrustful of government, which is the case now. So I always try to point out the positives. So I always want regulators, please be really vocal, speak to both companies, private sector and public sector, the governments need to understand, why are we doing this? Why is it so important? Because you see, privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. If you value free and open societies, you must have privacy. People have to believe that they are in control of the use and disclosure of their personal information. This is essential for individuals to understand this, and that will build trust. Right now, trust is just lacking widely. And so I always want to urge people to speak up and tell companies you deal with, tell government departments you deal with what the problem is. And often what happens, Rosario, is at the first instance, let's say when a company collects personal information from a customer, usually there is positive consent obtained and the customer knows how the information is going to be used. It's all good. But often what happens is that information then flows throughout the company to various departments where you may need to obtain additional consent, but they don't know that. So I always say to companies, do you have a data map? And they go, huh? I want you to map the flow of data throughout your organization so that you can identify when additional consent is needed for secondary uses that hadn't been contemplated at the time of the primary data collection. And once they do that, they love it because then they immediately know when they need to go back to the customer, get additional consent for secondary uses. And the same applies to governments. And governments may, in fact, be worse than companies because they collect personal information at the first instance for the primary purpose of the data collection. And then all kinds of different departments use it for different purposes. Completely unacceptable. So when regulators speak out about this, it makes a big difference. Make a point of going to your government representative and discussing this. Make a point of talking to companies and discussing this. I have found with companies especially, they really value my input. They want to know what they should be doing and what they're not doing properly. They welcome the interaction because I always present privacy as a positive. It's not something that's going to hold you back. Once you embed it into your operations, it will enhance trust, it will enhance customers. It's a win-win. Privacy and security go hand in hand.
And probably privacy and business.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
yeah.
And thank you for saying that. When I tell them, get rid of the zero-sum mindset, meaning privacy versus security or privacy versus business interests. Get rid of that. That's so yesterday. You need both privacy and business interests hand in hand, privacy and data utility, privacy and security. It always has to be and then the returns are far greater.
The last question, Anne, you were saying correctly that privacy enhancing trust. From your point of view, you know that GDPR sets very huge fines in case of violation. And the first level of the fine, of the sanction, is a reprimand. Do you are more for a reprimand attitude or approach rather than huge pecuniary sanctions?
Yes, I am, Rosario. And the value of a reprimand is a lot of, especially companies in the private sector, they're not that familiar with privacy and data protection and the GDPR and the specifics and how they should be implementing it. So when you give a reprimand, you get their attention immediately. They see what they're doing wrong and how they need to correct it, which they most likely weren't aware of to begin with. So I find a reprimand very useful in terms of educating the different parties as to what they should be doing that they're not doing. So I love the idea of the first reprimand, get their attention, get them to focus on the harms and what they need to do. Then if they don't do it, then you kick in with the fines. But I think the model of having a reprimand first is exceptional. People value it enormously. And companies have told me, oh my God, we weren't aware of that. We didn't know we should be doing this. You know, it's not there every day. I mean, this is my bread and butter. This is what I do for a living, but most companies don't do that, of course. So I love the reprimand idea. I think it has enormous value. And I think a lot of positive returns will result from that.
Thank you very much.
Rosario, it's been my pleasure. Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you.